I planted a loud surprise in my unfaithful wife's purse and triggered it during her affair. Although my workshop was truly the thing I had missed the most, a sanctuary where I could find peace for my soul. Not that there was anything wrong with my spirit, but it was a way to express an underlying discontent. At some point, things unraveled between us, though I can't say exactly when it crept up slowly. I'm quite skilled with household repairs, capable of fixing nearly everything myself, and I dislike hiring someone and paying them nearly a full day's wage for a couple of hours of subpar work. However, what I couldn't repair was my marriage. To clarify, it's like trying to fix a precious china plate. You can glue it back together, but it's never truly whole again. When a marriage shatters, it may be patched up, but it will never be the same. I didn't want a patched up version of what we once had. After 18 years together, my wife Tracy decided to pursue other relationships, at least one that I know about, and by the time I found out, it was too late to avoid the 59 damage. I'm not the quickest to notice issues in relationships, and I thought we were fine. We married right out of high school and quickly had our daughter, Carly. Complications afterward meant we couldn't have more children, but we were satisfied. My job in auto body repair provided well enough, though it lacked any significant future. I could have started my own shop, but I never felt drawn to running a business. Life seemed manageable as long as we were comfortable financially. Tracy spent her evenings taking classes at the community college, driven and ambitious, far more so than I was. But when Carly began school, Tracy started working, bringing in extra money that enhanced our lives. With 2 incomes, we managed to buy a modest house in a pleasant neighborhood. We had no desire for something larger or more extravagant. For years, Tracy managed our finances carefully, always looking presentable without splurging unnecessarily. Meanwhile, my wardrobe generally consisted of jeans and flannel shirts. Tracy always looked polished, but I often appeared rough with bushy eyebrows and a long ponytail. I wasn't trying to make a statement, I just liked it that way. People didn't mock my appearance, as I had enough build to deter that. However, my casual look occasionally embarrassed Tracy. When we went out, she never mentioned it, but I could sense it. As Carly grew, Tracy became more immersed in her work, excelling in insurance claims and bringing home a larger paycheck than mine, yet without any 231 remarks. By Carly's high school years, Tracy had transformed into a sophisticated professional, spending more on her wardrobe, salon visits, and gym sessions, which gave her an attractive appearance while I remained the scruffy, unrefined embarrassment. Our marriage's next phase seemed almost unavoidable. Over the years, my bond with Carly strengthened as I spent more time with her than Tracy did, and our connection grew. Tracy, meanwhile, was either at work or focused on work at home, and our family time became scarcer as her career progressed. Our personal time dwindled as well. She was often too exhausted, and I began to feel like the man she once saw herself spending a lifetime with was no longer the one beside her. I grew up in public housing, raised by a single mother who worked as a waitress to support my brother Robert and me. It was tough for her, and we weren't exactly easy kids, frequently getting into trouble. Those rough edges stayed with me into marriage. I was impulsive and quick-tempered, which landed me in juvenile detention more than once. Tracy knew about my past, but since marrying, I had reined it in, mellowing out. As Tracy and I grew apart, 329, I turned to my basement workshop for solace, a small, dimly lit space. Troubled by the failing marriage, I tried typical gestures like flowers, gifts, and dinners with nice wine, but nothing helped. Frustrated, I escaped to my little haven whenever possible. Carly remained the bright spot in my life, yet I felt I was letting her down, seeing myself as a flawed father and husband. Were these feelings my own, or did Tracy's actions make me feel this way? She cared about me and wouldn't intentionally hurt me. To distract myself from these inadequacies, I spent hours crafting electronic gadgets, though they were simple devices you could find anywhere. My first project was a fake surveillance camera, amusing to make, albeit useless. As I practiced, my projects became more complex, though I never advanced beyond a hobbyist level. Weekends found Carly and me browsing yard sales and flea markets. She collected vintage clothes, while I sought old electronics and remote control toys, with Tracy usually staying home. 2 months ago, I began to suspect Tracy was being unfaithful, and it didn't take long to confirm it. She would meet Todd Wick, a co-worker, at his apartment every Tuesday and Thursday for lunches lasting 2 hours, making little effort to hide the relationship. I couldn't tell if she was simply complacent or just didn't care, but by now the relationship felt broken beyond repair. Realizing something needed to change, I spent the entire day getting ready to leave. With Carly starting college in 3 weeks, and her first 2 semesters already paid for, I felt it was the right moment to let go, though I'd miss her. I took half of the funds from our savings account, unconcerned about other financial matters, just enough to get away and begin again. Filing for divorce seemed overly complicated and pointless, so I had my lawyer draft a power of attorney for Tracy to sell the house. He also prepared papers to sue Todd Wickham and Continental Memorial Insurance, though I doubted success due to their shared workplace. Regardless, the attorney was open to trying for a potential cut of the winnings. I instructed him to go ahead. Most of the evening was 5:32 spent working on a modified alarm keychain, which was no longer a regular keychain, but featured an unusually loud alarm for its size. I boosted the battery to 9 volts, increasing its volume and duration. Configuring it for remote activation, I ensured it couldn't be easily turned off. The device, encased in 3-inch PVC plastic with 20 drilled holes, had a small antenna protruding from it. Once finished, I added PVC caps to both ends and painted it matte black with barbecue paint, though the choice of paint was random. If all went as planned, the only way to stop it would be to submerge it in water. Attempts to make it waterproof dulled the sound, so I left it as it was. Tracy had already gone to bed, allowing me to slip the device into her purse's lining through a small tear in a side pocket. I estimated it would take at least 5 minutes to find and remove from the purses bottom long enough to create a scene before my departure. Satisfied with my work, I spent 6:30 the next few hours loading items into my truck, gathering my workshop tools, and doing a final check. Clothing could wait until morning, once Tracy had left for work. I spent the night on the couch, and when Tracy, dressed for work, asked about my plans, I explained I'd been up late working on a project and was just catching a few hours of rest. She offered to make me something to eat, but I replied I'd just have coffee and an English muffin before leaving. As she 6:58 reminded me to rinse my dishes, I couldn't help noticing how good she looked. Would I miss her? At least for a while, I thought. I grabbed some trash bags and headed to the bedroom to gather the clothes I wanted. Suddenly, Carly appeared, asking what I was doing. Surprised, I asked why she wasn't at school, and she explained she'd already met her graduation requirements. She demanded an explanation, so I set down the bags, suggested we go to the kitchen, and offered her coffee. She laughed slightly and asked if I knew Mom was cheating on me. I played it cool, asking what she meant. Carly said she had found out about 2 months earlier and was frustrated that I hadn't acted sooner. I told her I'd only recently learned of it myself and that I planned to leave. Carly pressed for details, asking if I'd confronted her mom. I admitted I hadn't and asked if she had. Carly revealed that she confronted Tracy 2 months ago, but Tracy gave no clear answers, almost as if she wanted to get caught. We sat in silence for a few moments, processing it all. I told Carly I hadn't decided where I'd go yet, while she talked about her upcoming college plans. I assured her I had made all necessary arrangements. Carly asked about my boat and other possessions, and I explained that my old friend Felix would be helping with a few things, including looking after the boat. As I placed the cups in the sink, I realized I hadn't even made the English muffin I'd mentioned. Carly asked about the boat again, and when I confirmed I was giving it to Felix, she smiled. In that moment, I felt a deep appreciation for my daughter. About 20 minutes later, I was hooking the boat to the truck. When I bought the boat, I'd hoped it would be something the family could enjoy together, but Tracy had never taken to it. She disliked boats and water. Carly and I went out a few times, but it wasn't the same, so the boat had just been sitting by the garage. I wouldn't miss it. Among my belongings were a few firearms and a deer rifle my father gave me before moving to Florida. Felix would get more use out of them than I would, especially since he didn't hunt. I loaded all my snap-on and power tools into the back of the boat, accepting that my handyman days were over. Felix was barely awake when I arrived. He had 2 mixed-breed dogs, and it was clear they weren't morning dogs. Felix offered us early beers, and his dogs went back to bed. When I was 15, Felix and I broke into a golf course maintenance shed, which housed copper fittings for the sprinkler system. I'd figured we could make some money by selling the copper, and Felix was eager to join. Of course, we got caught, or rather I did. Felix managed to escape, though the cops knew I hadn't acted alone, but I insisted it was just me. I got 2 years of probation for my mistake, but gained a lifelong friend for keeping quiet. Felix, though white like me, spoke with a ghetto accent, a trait he'd picked up from his neighborhood. Though our backgrounds weren't that different, Felix had adapted to his surroundings in a way I hadn't. Felix noticed the boat and asked if we were going fishing, to which I explained it was a gift for my best buddy. Laughing, he said he was my only friend. I told Felix I was leaving town for a while and needed him to take care of my things. Sliding the boat trailer title across the kitchen table, Felix chuckled, thinking I was joking. But I assured him it was serious. Felix, always eager to help, jokingly asked if I wanted anyone taken care of. To which I clarified that I just wanted someone to spend time in the emergency room or recovery ward, emphasizing no one should be killed, only injured. Felix's smile grew wider as I explained I wanted this done every 6 weeks for 6 months, or until the person left town. With curiosity, Felix asked if this was about the man who had taken Tracy from me. He instantly regretted his comment, apologized, and went to the fridge to grab 2 more beers. I handed Felix a 3x5 card listing Todd Wickham's name, address, and license number, advising him to wait a couple of weeks before doing anything. He glanced at the card, then nodded toward the door. The power tools and weapons were a bonus he hadn't anticipated. He carried them inside as I unhooked the boat. After a few more minutes of chatting, we parted ways. I trusted Felix a year ago. There had been 2 people I could rely on, but now it was only Felix. On Tuesday, I watched Tracy and Todd leave the company building, getting into Todd's Lexus exactly at 11. I easily followed them to his apartment, already aware of their destination. There wasn't any romantic behavior. They simply acted like a married couple. After giving them 15 minutes to settle, I pressed the button on the remote, but nothing happened. The device didn't work. What had I done wrong? I left the truck, walked toward the apartment building, and tried again, still with no response. As I pondered my next move, I decided out of frustration to deflate Todd's tires, targeting the 2 on the side away from the building. In a final attempt, I approached the building and pressed the button once more. This time it worked. The loud sound was unmistakable from outside. It had to be deafening inside. The noise blared for a second, paused for 2, then repeated. Everyone in the complex was now getting a show from my little gadget. Smiling, I walked back to my truck, still hearing the beeping from halfway down the block. Things were going even better than I'd planned. At 2, my lawyer would deliver lawsuit papers to Todd and his company. I'd be long gone by then. When I got home, Carly was waiting. She handed me a card with her college address and cell number, which I already had, along with a few extra items I'd missed, even packing me a lunch so I wouldn't need to stop until I left the state. She explained her thoughtfulness, and we both laughed and shared a hug. I left my power of attorney document and wedding ring on the kitchen table. Carly said she'd explain things to her mom. My tools were under the truck bed cover, with my personal items crammed behind the seat in the cab. As I drove away for the last time, my phone rang. It was Tracy. I turned it off. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction, though I was curious about what she'd say. Taking Interstate 81 south was my best escape route, and I drove non-stop until I reached Chattanooga. The motel was seedy, but there was a bar next door. Big mistake. I drank too much, and while I slept it off, some locals borrowed all my body shop tools from the back of the truck. They didn't touch anything in the cab. Maybe they were either too honest or just couldn't carry any more. I showered, shaved, and changed into clean clothes, then grabbed breakfast at the Waffle House before heading toward Nashville. I regretted my foolishness and wondered how I'd manage without my tools. Attempting to get a body shop job wasn't feasible now, so I sat in a Crystal restaurant, scanning help wanted ads. Most were either commission-based or minimum wage, with the few regular positions requiring qualifications I lacked. Then I noticed a brief ad for an auto damage appraiser needing body shop experience at Conrad Insurance Company. I powered on my phone, called the number in the AD ad, got an address, and set up an appointment within the hour. Deleting 5 calls from Tracy, I entered the address into the GPS and headed over. I liked to be early, though I quickly realized I was underdressed for the interview. Too late to change now. They'd have to take me as I was. When I arrived, 3 other men, all well-dressed and holding resumes, were waiting. Each took a turn with the manager, coming out after 5 minutes looking dissatisfied. Feeling confident, I figured I couldn't do worse. The man behind the desk was well-dressed but looked rough, with faded tattoos and calloused hands like mine. He wasn't an executive, he was a hands-on guy in formal attire. He noticed my grin and gave a slight smile back. He read my interview form quickly. I'd left many sections blank, not out of arrogance, but because I lacked the details to fill them in. Hemingway, Daniel Hemingway, I clarified, adding that I wasn't related to the famous author. He seemed relieved, saying he didn't want intellectual types around. Introducing himself as Grady Burgess, he asked why I was there. I assured him I wouldn't try to deceive him, aware others had been dismissed for nonsense. I shared how I'd gotten drunk in Chattanooga and lost all my tools, making it tough to find a shop job. This position seemed like a suitable alternative. Grady seemed to understand, though he sensed there was more behind my story. I confessed my judgment had been clouded due to learning about my wife's infidelity. After 18 years of marriage, Grady asked about my wife's current location, and I told him she was in Pennsylvania. He then called over Marcy, a woman in her mid-40s, to bring us 2 coffees. She placed 2 plain white ceramic mugs on the table without any cream or sugar. Grady, in a booming voice, instructed her to cancel the rest of the appointments, saying they had found what they were looking for. Marcy gave Grady a displeased look and then winked at me. Embarrassed, I noticed Grady smiling at my discomfort. We talked for about 2 hours before he carefully explained the job requirements, along with details about the salary and benefits. The only drawback was the emphasis on appearance. Minus 80% of the role involved interacting with clients, making image crucial. This meant I needed a haircut, a complete grooming overhaul, and a new wardrobe, including a shoe shine kit. Grady emphasized that Marcy would personally assist me with everything necessary. I was expected to arrive in Atlanta by Monday morning for a week of training. Conrad Insurance was an independent agency but worked as a contractor for several major national auto insurance companies, meaning everything had to meet strict standards. While the company covered all training expenses, the costs for clothes and grooming were my responsibility. Marcy seemed to enjoy the rest of the week more than I did, treating me as her personal project. Although I insisted on going to a barbershop rather than a salon, she took charge of every other decision. Not only did I get a haircut, but I also had my eyebrows, ears, and nose hairs trimmed. Marcy told the barber I'd be back every 10 days for the same treatment. My work attire consisted of generic pants and white shirts, and she even found a jacket that matched the pants. I received 2 pairs of black steel-toe dress shoes and a dozen black socks. She secured a small studio apartment for me and helped me set it up. On Friday morning, I got my Tennessee driver's license, and that afternoon, Marcy handed me the keys to a company car and a laptop before leaving me at the apartment. Standing on her tiptoes, she kissed me on the cheek, teasing that if Grady weren't so possessive, she'd have to jump my bones. While flattered, the thought of her implication made me shiver a bit. It was time to call Carly. I called Carly and shared that I'd secured a desk job doing field appraisals. I explained it was the first place I'd applied and that I seemed to have been in the right place at the right time. Carly asked about home, and I mentioned I was fine, but Mom was a mess. Carly, surprised, expected Mom would be glad I was gone. I added that Mom seemed to have some sort of plan that I'd unintentionally disrupted. Carly revealed that Mom had spent the first day at the kitchen table, chanting and unresponsive when spoken to. I apologized for throwing off Mom's plans, and Carly speculated that Mom might have been expecting a confrontation but hadn't anticipated my sudden departure. We both agreed it was unexpected, and I apologized again. Changing the topic, I asked Carly about her plans. She intended to leave for school once Mom calmed down a bit, hoping to enroll in a few summer classes. I shared that I was leaving for Atlanta the next day and promised to call her when I got back. Carly expressed relief that things were working out for me and was confident that Mom would soon snap out of her funk. The training in Atlanta was straightforward, mainly covering how to fill out the correct information in the right fields. The biggest challenge was my limited computer skills, but I managed to get a few of the young female trainees to tutor me. They seemed a bit disappointed by my reserved demeanor, as I found it difficult to resist their attention. The next 2 years flew by. Grady was pleased with my work and showed his appreciation with raises and bonuses. I kept in regular contact with Carly, who was thriving in her classes and social life. She was dating, which made me, as her father, a bit uneasy, but she just laughed off my concern. I never heard from Tracy, who made no attempts to reach me. I wasn't hiding, so if she'd wanted to contact me, it wouldn't have been hard. She sold the house, prepaid Carly's tuition with the money, and left town. Tracy would call Carly every few weeks, but their relationship never returned to its previous state. I gave Tracy credit for trying, but Carly had no idea where she'd moved to and never asked. Tracy never filed for divorce, so I figured I could hold out as long as she could. My social life was another story. I'd never thought of myself as a ladies' man, but my improved appearance and marital freedom brought out a new side of me. Technically, I was still married, but given the circumstances, it didn't feel that way. Nashville was full of women seeking companionship, and I always made it clear that I was married and not looking for anything serious. Surprisingly, this honesty was appealing to many, including a few married women. I was careful never to date the married ones more than once and never took them back to my apartment. With single women, it didn't matter as much, as long as they understood I wasn't looking for a long-term commitment. Grady eventually hired 2 more guys to do the same job I did, and I had the chance to train and supervise them. Although there was plenty of work, I sensed something was changing. Grady approached me, saying we needed to talk. While his serious tone was unsettling, it was his use of the dreaded phrase often used when delivering bad news that really concerned me. Grady laughed when I groaned, assuring me not to overreact, as it wasn't as bad as it seemed. We chuckled together before he dropped a bombshell. "Daniel, I hate to say it, but you've outgrown this job." Confused, I asked what he meant, and Grady explained that I could handle a more challenging role. While he had no complaints, he felt it was time for me to think about moving on. Defensive, I asked if he was firing me, but he firmly denied it, clarifying that he only wanted to motivate me to progress. Marcy entered with 2 coffees without being asked, leaned over and whispered, loud enough for Grady to hear, that he feared I'd steal her away. She assured me not to worry, adding that if he let me go, she'd leave with me. Grady groaned as Marcy left, her laughter echoing and sending a chill down my spine. He then informed me of a job interview scheduled for me in Houston on Friday. American Consolidated Claims was seeking someone to oversee their national operations, specifically in appraisals, and Grady had already spoken to them on my behalf. I questioned why they didn't hire young college graduates, and Grady explained they'd tried that 3 times, unsuccessfully. Curious, I asked what he stood to gain, and he revealed that in about 4 years, he and Mark planned to relocate to Gulf Shores, and a CC had agreed to buy the business when he was ready to sell. I understood he wasn't doing this out of kindness, but was using me as part of a larger deal. He admitted as much, saying, "See, I always knew you were sharp." We shared another laugh at his transparent but cunning plan. On Thursday night, I headed for Houston. I preferred not to relocate, but Grady's reasoning was sound. Though I could have flown, I decided to drive instead. American Consolidated occupied 3 floors in a massive office building, and they were expecting me. I felt confident, ready to defend my qualifications if challenged, knowing their previous MBA hires hadn't succeeded. The first 2 interviews went smoothly, but during the third, a talkative middle manager questioned my formal business education until his boss cut him off. I appreciated the support, but also felt annoyed. I spent the final hour with the human resources director discussing salary and benefits as if my acceptance was already decided. Honestly, at that point, it felt inevitable, and it would be tough to turn down the offer. As lunch approached, my host eagerly showed me the company cafeteria. The floor was vast, with offices around the edges and cubicles filling the center. My host expressed optimism about my potential fit, and I reciprocated, saying American Consolidated seemed like a top-tier organization. I joked about the confusion that could arise with 2 department heads named Hemingway, clarifying that I had no family in Houston. Unexpectedly, she mentioned a distant relative named Tracy, catching me off guard. While walking, I spotted Tracy across the room. She looked radiant, chatting with a small group, and I couldn't stop staring as if mesmerized. Lost in thought, I bumped into a mail cart, causing a slight commotion. Tracy noticed, looking surprised, and I seized the moment to quickly leave. When asked if something was wrong, I explained that I'd been distracted, admiring the office layout. The elevator ride felt interminable. When we reached the cafeteria entrance, I thanked MS Thurgood and expressed my regret at declining the offer. She looked stunned, mouth agape, as I quietly exited. I acknowledged it was a fantastic job and knew I might regret walking away someday. However, being near Tracy regularly would bring more heartache than I could bear. I wondered why she hadn't filed for divorce and hoped she'd reclaim her maiden name when she finally did. I knew Grady would be upset, but I'd deal with that later. 12 hours later, I was back home. Surprisingly, Grady was more sympathetic than angry, apologizing. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I had no idea your ex was at a CC sitting across from him." I smiled as Marcy entered with 2 coffees. I reassured Grady, saying there was no way he could have known and that no one was at fault. I admitted, if I had any guts, I'd have just taken the job and faced her. But as you see, I didn't. Grady replied, "That doesn't make you any less of a man, Daniel. You couldn't win in that situation. I'd have done the same." I added, "I hope I didn't mess up your deal with them." Grady chuckled, setting down his coffee. "No worries, Daniel. They still want it, and the deal is intact." Life continued as usual over the following years. Carly graduated from college and married a nice guy from Cleveland. I made it to the wedding in time to give her away, but didn't stay long. Tracy was there, looking stunning. It was tough to avoid her, but I managed. Carly seemed disappointed I didn't stay for the entire event, but she said she understood and was grateful I came. I was glad Tracy got to see her daughter Mary. To fill my free time, I began taking college classes, which felt more productive than frequenting bars. Most other night school students were older, and a few of the women took the place of bar companions. Grady generously covered the costs for the classes. Eventually, the time came for Grady to retire, and all the terms of the sale were finalized. Since I'd expressed reluctance to stay with a CC, Grady arranged an interview for me with a Chicago firm. Although I was hesitant, Grady emphasized the job package was exceptional, especially given the competitive job market. Upon arriving at the Universal Amalgamated Insurance Building, I was escorted to the 18th floor, where I noticed the name on the door -E.MT Peak. To my surprise, it was the executive from a CC who had defended my qualifications during the interview. The first half hour went smoothly, but then things took a turn. Mr. Peak expressed disappointment about my abrupt departure after our conversation in Houston, admitting he somewhat understood after learning the details. I apologized for leaving so suddenly and explained that I hadn't been prepared to face the consequences that came with the role. Mr. Peak then asked if I had sense. Learned how to handle difficult situations more effectively. He mentioned setting up another interview for me and casually brought up a small glass dome on Tracy Hemingway's desk at a CC, asking about a black object inside. His question about Tracy made me uneasy, leaving me to wonder how she was connected to this interview. He explained that he valued Tracy's contributions and wanted her to stay, encouraging me to compliment her. Feeling cornered, I described the black item as a trinket I'd made for my wife before we separated, uncertain why she still had it. Mr. Peak pressed on about its purpose, but I ended the discussion, stating he'd need to ask Tracy himself. I rose, unsettling Mr. Peak, who quickly ushered me toward Tracy's office, talking faster. Her office door displayed only her name and job title. Entering, I saw Tracy at her desk, looking older yet even more beautiful than I remembered. Over the years, I'd dwelled on her betrayal, letting my image of her grow darker as my resentment deepened, but realizing that I still thought of her often suggested I hadn't entirely stopped loving her. Though I despised what she'd done, my feelings lingered. Lost in these thoughts, I realized I was subtly shaking my head. Her voice pulled me from my reverie. "Dan, nobody told me you were coming. What are you doing here?" she asked, beginning to rise. I gestured for her to stay seated and took the chair across from her, unsure how to start. "You look well, Daniel," she continued, "even better than in Houston." This wasn't the conversation I expected, and I didn't know how to respond. I certainly wasn't going to compliment her looks. Mr. Peak had brought me here to clarify the purpose of the so-called trinket on her desk. She instinctively reached toward the glass dome, then stopped, replying, "That's nonsense, Daniel, and we both know it. He offered you a job again, and he's frustrated you declined it. In Houston, I stayed silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I wanted to talk to you," she said, "but you'd left before I could." "Why would you want that?" I asked. Back then, I still hoped to explain things to you, but now I realized there was nothing to clarify. It was all out in the open. I started to regret coming, contemplating how to leave without looking foolish. "Did you ever want an explanation?" she asked, noticing my curiosity. She continued, inquiring why I kept the little trinket. I told her it reminded me of my own naivety, a symbol that one misstep could ruin a lifetime. When I mentioned she'd only slept with him once, she corrected me, saying that wasn't her point. Before I left, I asked if she could provide an explanation that wouldn't sound like a tired cliche. She replied she likely couldn't, acknowledging she'd given Carly an explanation before it was too late. I pressed her on what that meant, and she revealed that when Carly confronted her, nothing had yet happened. She'd simply looked at Carly. The conversation was steering away from where I wanted, but if she insisted on telling me, I'd demand the summarized version. I didn't want all the details. She went on, admitting that until about 6 weeks before I left, she and Todd had only spent time together, meeting for lunch and watching a few movies. Todd knew her intentions and agreed to help. None of it was his fault. "What are you talking about?" I asked, baffled. "It was a plan, Daniel," she explained, "a setup to make you jealous, not exactly jealous, but to get your attention." Confused, I asked for clarification. She said she'd been buying me things, going out to dinner, doing everything she thought would please me. When I insisted it was her fault, that wasn't the reaction she was hoping for. I sat in silence. She explained it was never my fault and admitted she hadn't realized it until after I left. Reflecting on what she'd done, she understood how wrong she was. Tracy continued, seemingly overwhelmed, and I asked again, "What are you talking about?" She decided to start from the beginning, mentioning that when Todd joined the company, she'd noticed him immediately. He was polished, well-dressed, and respectful, everything I wasn't. "Was that when you decided you wanted him?" I asked. She clarified that it was when she realized she wanted me to resemble him. It was always me she wanted, not him she hoped I would look and act like he did, like I do now. I pressed her on what happened next, and she admitted she knew it was wrong in a marriage for one partner to try to change the other. A good relationship required each person to accept the other as they were. If she'd tried to change me herself, it might have ended our marriage, but if I'd chosen to change on my own, it would have been different. I responded, saying it was the first thing she'd said that made sense. She went on, explaining that when she started spending time openly with Todd, it was to catch my attention. Either I'd confront her or figure it out and take some kind of action. I asked what kind of action she meant. She explained that she hoped I'd get a routine haircut like I do now and start dressing better and showing more interest. It hadn't worked, and she couldn't understand why. She admitted that Carly had figured it out and confronted her. Carly didn't know her reasons, but did recognize what she was doing. She and Todd hadn't been intimate then, so she didn't feel too guilty, though she was slightly annoyed that Carly confronted her. She confessed she'd messed up with both her husband and her daughter. I asked if she had eventually slept with him, and she admitted yes, she knew they both played a part, and while he could have stopped it, he hadn't. I sat in silence, unsure what to say or ask next. About 2 weeks after Carly's confrontation, she and Todd were alone at his place, drinking wine, something she admitted wasn't wise. She was feeling down because I hadn't noticed anything yet. One thing led to another, and they ended up in bed. She described it as drunken intimacy, which she admitted wasn't the best, but it happened. They avoided each other for the following 2 weeks, and she was a wreck at home, blaming me for not caring enough to prevent it. She'd been with another man because she felt her husband didn't care. It was foolish, but I didn't end it. She felt down and talked with Todd again a week later, and their encounters became frequent. The next week I caught them, but by then it was too late. She expressed regret, feeling she'd been slow to realize her mistake, believing things would have been okay if she'd figured it out earlier. I made a snide remark, and she commented that sarcasm didn't suit me. It was time for me to go. I sat silently, trying to think of something witty to say, but nothing came to mind. She acknowledged that what I did to Todd was harsh and unnecessary. When she questioned why it was cruel, I pointed out that Todd had never done anything to deserve it. He hadn't tried to woo her or disrespect me, nor had he intended to break up our marriage. He'd only done what she asked of him, though he made some poor decisions. Now, she explained, Todd has to walk with a cane for the rest of his life because of it. In response, I told her to try seeing things from my perspective before saying that. It was the most clever retort I could muster in the moment. As I stood, I saw tears forming in her eyes. Walking out, I heard her stifle a sob. 8 hours later, I was back in Nashville. Grady was, of course, disappointed with my news, though he had a generous severance package for me. I called Carly, filling her in on my conversation with her mother and suggesting she reach out to her. She didn't seem very eager. A week later, I left Tennessee with a new truck and a comfortable savings. I ended up in Yuba City, where Merle Kohout was selling his auto repair shop to retire in Hawaii. Confident I could handle the business, I bought it and arranged to send Merle and his wife a nice retirement check each month. The business was clean and located just outside of town, with a small 2-bedroom cottage in the back perfect for me. 10 employees came with the shop. I kept 6 and let the lazy ones go, planning to hire new ones as needed. I intended to burn all the suits I'd accumulated, but decided instead to donate them to the Salvation Army. They had a job interview program, and the suits would be useful to someone who needed them. My mustache grew back with vigor, as if happy to be free from the restrictions it had endured over the past few years. Soon my hair was long enough to pull back. Watch out, Willie Nelson, here comes Daniel Hemingway. The business prospered, and I felt like my old self again. Everything was going well until the week before Christmas. That morning I found a small wrapped package on my desk. I stared at it for a moment, then called in my foreman, asking, "What's this?" He shrugged, replying, "Not sure, boss. A lady came by early this morning and left it. She said she'd be back at lunchtime." I sat for a long time, not touching the package, knowing exactly what was inside. What I didn't know was what I'd do after opening it. I poured myself a hot cup of black coffee, stared at the package a bit longer, and finally began unwrapping it, oddly careful not to tear the paper. My foreman returned just as I was holding the black plastic item with roughly 20 small holes in it. "What's that, boss?" he asked. I set it down and leaned back in my chair. "I'll tell you after lunch," I replied.